Welcome to Black Men Speak. It's a podcast that highlights ordinary Black men doing extraordinary things. And I'm your host, Keith Dent. And hey, I know it's been a while. I took an extended vacation, take care of just myself and others. It was Mother's Day last week. Shout out to my mom and my wife, and wanted to make sure that we celebrated them and all mothers all over the world. And so, I'm just glad to be here, and hopefully today's topic is just going to be, I think, just spectacular. I know in this show, I tried not to focus on sports, but this is kind of in a different vein. um, and um, and it's very kind of appropriate because this past week we lost one of our great athletes, Jim Brown, but he was also a great civil rights activist, and he passed away at 87 years young. And if you don't really know about his story, you really should read about it because he was one of the individuals that really brought race to the forefront back into the 50s. And that was not something that athletes really did. So he was prominent in a thing which aptly had a name called the Cleveland Summit, and he called out other famous athletes to participate. And there's athletes like Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Muhammad Ali, who was kind of the main focal point because of his protests of the Vietnam War and other things. And of course, we all, anyone that knows about Muhammad Ali knows what kind of happened to him. Uh, you know, he, I think he renounced his title, and hey, if you don't know, Google his story. But it's fantastic. But this summit kind of also made a significant turning point in the role of athletes and activism, in our society. And so, there were other activists that, came after him and, different things, but it called also kind of led to the 21st century and protest movement that, of course, everybody really knows about. But at the forefront of that was the athlete by the name of Colin Kaepernick. And so today, on today's show, we're going to be talking about someone who covered that story, and his name is David Steele. And so he's the author of "It Was Always a Choice," picking up the baton of athlete activism. So, and just want to read a little bio on him. If you haven't heard of him, he really explored the complications and risk accounted by professional athletes regarding their personal involvement in social issues. David is a veteran and an award-winning sports journalist who currently writes about sports for a legal news site called Law 360. Which, when I saw that, I was like, "What could they be covering?" But basically, probably some legal news, contract stuff, and hey, sports is ingrained in everything these days. So, but he's also the co-author of Silent Gestures, the autobiography of Tommy Smith, and the Four Generations of Color, the autobiography of baseball scout and sports agent Miles McAfee. So, um, bring him up, David. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure and a real honor to be invited on here.
Great, great. So let's kind of before we get into Colin and his story, what really prompted you to write this book in the first place?
Well, I've written about this sort of topic and this aspect of sports and society for a long time. Once I got a chance to be a sports columnist after years of being a sports beat writer and general assignment writer and things like that, and I started writing columns. I started, focusing in every chance I got on things like historical movements that athletes took part in, activities that were going on, and issues and controversies that athletes either were choosing to take part in, speak out about, or choose not to. Focusing on that kind of led to having the opportunity to co-author the autobiography of Tommy Smith. I was working in California at the time, and he was still teaching in Southern California long after his career had ended and everything. And it was an opportunity to tell his life story and talk about everything that led up to his evolution as the man, sort of him and John Carlos being at the center of that 1968 Olympics protest with their fist raised on the victory stand. That ended up sort of leading several years later to an opportunity to write about the 50th anniversary of that protest when I was working for the Sporting News. This was in 2018. And when I wrote about that, I decided I wanted to put it into the context of today. And at that time, what Colin Kaepernick was doing was at the top of everybody's mind. And that was still really, working its way throughout the entire sports world, through the NFL. He was still being blackballed by the NFL at the time. And there were so many parallels between what he was doing and what he was enduring, and what those athletes from, the 1960s and in that era were going through. So I did that piece. And then 2 years later come the George Floyd protests and all the ways that the athletes and the sports world engaged with that, sometimes, usually for the better, but, sometimes for worse. And just sort of seeing again how the athletes, decided to speak up and use their platforms and use their voices to really engage everybody on everything that was going on across the country. And so as that was going on, that's when somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think this might be an opportunity for a book." And I said, "Hey, I really kind of just wrote about that in a fairly long article a couple of years ago. What do you think about turning that into a book?" And here we are today. And that's how It Was Always a Choice came about.
That's great. And I know this is not one of the things we talked about, but it was always a choice. So that's a pretty interesting title, because I think a lot of the athletes, well, maybe not now because of social media and everything, and we'll get into a question about that, but a lot of the athletes probably felt like they didn't have a choice to do that. So what made you decide to use that as the title of the book?
Well, as far as the title itself of the book, I really have to give credit to to my team at
Okay.
my publishers, Temple University Press. Anne Marie Anderson, our marketing director at the time, came up with that, and it struck me immediately. I said, "I think that's the one," because it really kind of encapsulates, the thread that runs through the entire book, and in a lot of ways through all the things that I've written about these, because the athletes who do choose to step up and to speak up and to act out and to engage in some sort of direct action, they do so, for the most part, understanding what the benefits are and what the risks are. And all the athletes who choose not to do the exact same thing, and more often than not, the athletes who decide to stay silent or decide to sort of stay on the side of the people who want them to just play ball, want them to just not to coin an original phrase, to shut up and dribble, to just stick to sports. They do so because they've made a calculation. They say, "Yeah, I do feel strongly about that, but not strongly enough to risk everything that I have, everything that I've put on the line, whether it's the money, the visibility, just being, having this sort of a career, setting up my kids and my grandkids for life, and really just facing the sort of repercussions that the Muhammad Ali's and the Tommy Smiths and the John Carloses, and in some cases, as you mentioned, the Jim Browns, the Bill Russells, people who faced incredible opposition, hatred, hate crimes, just being blackballed from their sport, being pushed away, having their careers shut down, and being influenced, the stresses that their entire lives go through, not just their careers. And certainly Colin Kaepernick, again, never set foot on a football field again after his choice of protesting. And that's what sort of crystallized for me. It's like, To choose to speak up with the platform and the voice that you have is a choice. And to not do anything at all and let somebody else take all the heat and basically choose your comfort over the possibility of making vast change in society, that's a choice as well.
Wow, yeah. So we'll definitely touch upon what you just said, a little later on as we address some of the individuals that didn't actually step up. So with that said, what's the overall, I guess, framework or personality traits that, as you were researching the book, that the activists that did decide to do that have?
Well, I always felt that it took an incredible amount of courage and perspective and understanding of the sacrifice and and in a lot of cases the consequences of your actions. And and this is, I want to be really careful. This is not to say that any of the athletes who have reached this level of success, who have this sort of visibility and these riches and this fame and adoration, across the country, sometimes around the world, and certainly very much concentrated within your own race amongst your own people. That didn't take a lot of courage either, because it's very hard to get all the way to the top, the way a lot of the athletes, well, really all the athletes do when they get that far. Um, but to reach that point and then to say, I'm going to speak out on something that could completely alienate and inspire the hatred of a vast percentage of of the public, the people who are so responsible for the lifestyle that I lead, for my popularity, and in obviously a lot of cases, the people who literally pay me, the people who write my checks, the people who determine the course of my athletic future, and sometimes my future beyond athletics as well. To do that because I have that sincere belief in my cause and and the strength of will to possibly give all of that up as I fight for this cause. It takes a courage beyond even the courage it takes to get to the top of your profession. So
Mm,
again, when you sort of look at the examples that we're talking about, when you look at Ali,
mhm.
the heavyweight champion of the world, he said, I'm not going to go to Vietnam. And they said, well, then you're not going to be heavyweight champion of the world anymore. They took his title, they took away his licenses. They said he couldn't fight anymore in his prime when he could have just put all the records away. And for them, that was it. And he was willing to go ahead and do that because of his beliefs. Tommy Smith and John Carlos
Yeah,
literally standing on the podium with the gold and the bronze medals at the Olympic Games on live TV, doing that at one of the most contentious times in American history, knowing that, and they've said this before, and Tommy Smith said it in his book, and John Carlos has hinted at it a bunch of times already. They did not know if they would make it off the stand and back into the stadium and under the stadium back to safety without somebody killing them right there on the field. They weren't sure about that.
mm,
Um, and again with Colin Kaepernick, he was, yeah, he was not starting at the time that he began his protest, but he was
right.
still a viable starting NFL quarterback who had just gone to the Super Bowl, who had broken records, who was still somebody who certainly could have played another 6, 7, the way things are, 10 more years, and decided this is more important, and realizing that he may never play again. And certainly at the end of the season, we realize now that was 7 years ago. He's 30 years old at the time that he did that, and he has never played again. And he has been, just the sort of, again, hatred and vitriol. And I mean, the president of the United States
Right.
took it upon himself to personally attack Colin Kaepernick
Right.
and to bring all of his forces and all the people behind him in line against him. Not everybody can do that. It's an even difficult thing to even write about it and be in support of that personally. Some people can't go into their jobs and speak themselves and speak up about these things themselves without putting those jobs in jeopardy. When you have that much, at your fingertips for the most part, knowing that really, literally, if you just keep your head down, you could just set yourself up for life. And he decided, no, this is more important than that. So, uh, understanding those, what level of sacrifice you have to take, and still choosing to go ahead and do it, I think that's sort of the tie that binds all of these athletes together.
Okay, right. Yeah, and so I mean, since the book was really centered around Colin Kaepernick and his journey, and all the other activists were kind of interwoven. Let's kind of set the scene, because we've started it already. You had mentioned that he wasn't starting at the time, so he was basically in San Francisco, was kind of on the tail end of his journey. He hadn't been playing well from what I can recall. But what was his, and San Francisco was such a iconic as far as quarterbacks are concerned. What was really his status within the community before the protests began?
Well, one thing to sort of always keep in perspective when you talk about him is where we are with black quarterbacks, and we've seen a lot of that. Certainly in recent years. I mean, certainly this past off season, we've seen everything that's sort of revolved around Lamar Jackson trying to get the contract that he's gotten. Just the history of black quarterbacks in this in this sport at this level is always something that the people have always sort of galvanized themselves behind. They know that it's still rare. They understand what the challenge is, and he had ascended, really as close to the peak as you possibly can. He was in a lot of ways being described as like the next generation of quarterback, doing a lot of things that basically Lamar is doing right now. But yeah, he hit a bad patch. He got injured. His play fell off. There was incredible turmoil within the 49ers organization, coaching changes, ownership feuding with different people. And, he was in a really tenuous spot, certainly at that time. There was a sense when he made his choices that it was going to take a lot for him to get his job back, which didn't necessarily mean that his career was going to be over, because obviously, players move around all the time and everything. And somebody else could very well have said, well, if that didn't work out there, we're willing to put our faith in you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a big contract thing going on, but it was a very volatile time, certainly for him in his career. So logically speaking, you would sort of think, well, whatever I got to do to sort of, safeguard my career and not do anything that'll jeopardize that. That's probably the thing I should do. Get myself healthy, earn my job back, put myself on display for other teams, or maybe ease my way back in, get lucky, get on a run or something like that. But what happened in the summer of 2016 really pushed him to the point where he decided, I can't just sit here and be quiet. And if we remember correctly, and I actually addressed it in the book as well, that was the summer that Philando Castile up in Minnesota was shot. And there was also the shooting in Baton Rouge of an unarmed black man. And through not long after that, there was a Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas where a sniper killed some Dallas policemen. So there was so much going on at that time. And athletes, little by little, were starting to speak out about it. They were taking to social media, which is something that you and I talked about a little bit, about the sort of visibility that social media allows you. So it wasn't a matter of, and it was obviously the NFL's off season. People aren't necessarily running around putting microphones in your face and cameras and things like that, asking every single athlete, "Hey, what do you think about this?" He took to his Twitter, he took to his Instagram, he took to every platform he had and said, this is an actual lynching. This is what the police are doing to us. Our lives do not matter to them. And again, this is sort of a continuation of what had gone on a few years earlier with Michael Brown and Trayvon, and just everything was building to a head. And that summer in particular was particularly hot. And he decided, I can't just talk about it. Even though athletes were starting to stir it up a little bit, other NFL players were talking in the same way. But he said, I can't just leave it at talking. I need to do something about it. That's when he started sitting out the national anthem. That led to him taking a knee during the national anthem. Teammates began to join him. But then once people realized what was going on and understood why he was doing it, and again, there were a lot of people who literally do not care whether or not the cops are killing us or not. He faced that backlash, and from then on, it was very much touch and go whether he would ever play again, and basically, whether he was ever going to be safe again in any way, because so many people came down on him, including obviously the NFL, which did everything it could to stop not just him, but other athletes from following in his footsteps. It didn't really help because a lot of athletes did start following in his footsteps. They began
Right.
raising their fists. They began taking a knee. They began linking their arms. They began speaking about this when reporters came up to them, began going on TV and on radio and again, using their own platforms to speak about this. And by that time, it was all starting to come together, so that he became the face of that in full knowledge of the possibility that it was going to put an end to his career. And as we saw, that's exactly what happened.
Right. Right. And so I know you focused on Colin, and I did see a piece, earlier where a lot of the, I guess, other athletes weren't really clear on what was happening. Um, and so, a football team is pretty huge. It's not like basketball is about maybe 12 guys where they might uh pal around. With a football team that large, with about 40 plus people on it, not everybody kind of hangs out together. So it'd be interesting to know really what happened in the locker room, especially since, as you could see, a lot of the protests fell upon racial lines. It was mostly black players that protest, except for a few, white athletes, Chris Long being one of them. But I'd love to hear that part of it. What was the kind of the tenor of like the locker rooms during this time?
Just to sort of take the 49ers themselves as an example, and then sort of to expand it to what was going on across the league and all the other locker rooms. It was very divided. There wasn't any question. Now, one sort of interesting facet of it was that even if they, vehemently disagreed with what he was doing and openly said, I would never do that in a million years. I would punch somebody or slap him in the face or yank him off of his knees if they ever tried to do that. And they'd start telling you their stories about, oh, my dad and my grandfather and all my uncles were in the military, and this, another, that, and the other was a cop, and all these things. They still saw what he did as something admirable because it took the guts that it did, because
Mm,
because it was courageous. And at a certain point during the season, when he did return to the starting lineup, they did support him. They did not take part in harassing him. They did not gang up against him. They really did follow him. It was a pretty bad team and they had a terrible record, but they more or less, coalesced behind him and supported him and put a public face on, their support of him. And at the end, they voted him their most courageous player. But in terms of who was actually going to stand behind him in terms of being part of the protest and speaking out, yeah, it was almost completely down racial lines. It was, very few white. And that, when the white players do it, that's why it stands out so much, because there was so much resistance and opposition by a lot of them. They felt offended personally. They felt offended politically. A lot of them leaned on that as their reason for offense. The black players supported him, but a lot of them were also very unsure of themselves whether they should put their necks out there and do it publicly. And as it turned out, there would maybe be no more than one or two teammates that would also take a knee with him on the sidelines, game after game after game. One of them was Eric Reed, and I got a chance to speak about him during the course of the book as well. And he was sent away after about another year or so, and
right.
he's had a difficult time getting back into the league as well. But he stood by him the whole time, and I specifically kneeled with him. Others, again, they might join they might have joined hands, or they might have raised their fist or something like that. So that was the case in the 49er locker room. In other locker rooms across the league, some of them were very united in saying we are not going to stab each other in the back and say, we're not going to support each other, things like that. So You have a team like the Eagles, you had teams like the Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks and others who said, Houston Texans, who said, okay, yeah, we may not agree with what you're saying, but we're not going to come out here and embarrass you or call you out or something like that. So if you want to raise your fist, or if you want to take a knee or do something else, we're going to be behind you. And so you would see that during the national anthem of the game. Other players were ordered, or at least strongly hinted, by their coaches, the GMs, and by the team owners not to do anything. That they would be punished, even though there was no specific rule in the NFL saying this is how you have to act during the national anthem. So a lot of they put that sort of pressure on a lot of the players. So even if they agreed with him, even if they spoke openly about agreeing with him, they were just absolutely prohibited or strongly hinted that there were going to be serious repercussions if they did anything. It really wasn't until a year after when Trump, openly mocked them and called them out and said they should all be fired, in the middle of his first year in office, that teams began collectively, even to the case of ownership, collectively starting to kneel, collectively raising their fists, collectively deciding to protest in some way. But in the early times, a lot of them just were not willing to commit themselves like that, and sometimes a lot of them, in my case, were still fighting with their own teammates in their in locker rooms and doing this very often, more often than not, down racial lines.
Wow. Okay. And so then we kind of fast forward to George Floyd and the issues with, since we're dealing on this theme, and we'll probably go back and forth there, where they were with that, it really triggered teams to start to speak out. Whereby you reference the Milwaukee Bucks as they decided not to play in a very important playoff game, which then sent ripple effects throughout the league. And so, why do you think that they didn't get the same backlash as a couple of years earlier? Is it because it was the NBA and it's primarily a league full of people of color, or was it just the times?
Part of it was that it was the NBA, and there were elements of what was going on at that time that sort of made that like sort of the perfect sort of ideal uh, uh, collision point, for lack of a better word, for something like that to happen, for the players to come together. But the times were very significant when it comes to that, because you got to remember, now this was now 4 years after Colin began kneeling. It was 4 years after the police murders that had motivated him to do that. Philando Castile and Alton Sterling down in Louisiana.
Mhm.
It had been, now we're going up on like 6 or 7 years since Michael Brown and Ferguson, and all the other ones that had gone on, and it was just an incredibly long list, as I think everybody remembers. They could just name so many that had sort of caught everybody's attention. And I think, as everybody knows now, looking back, but they also understood it at the time, George Floyd was the last straw. Just the confluence of everything that was happening at that time just broke everybody. Seeing the video, knowing that if the video had not come out, that it would have all been covered up, and the police would have made up a story about it, and it would have just been brushed off as somebody resisting arrest or whatever the excuse was going to be. The fact that it was live and vivid and living color, and to see that in the preceding days, there was still no satisfaction, no sort of resolution, no sort of attempt to hold anybody responsible there. Then the unrest began, and that just spiraled across the country and then around the world. I mean, by the time it got to the point where the NBA players were ready to act, it was a worldwide movement. It was literally the biggest social protest movement since like the Vietnam War.
Mm.
It just a brand new generation of people who took to the streets and said enough is enough, and that made for a much different atmosphere. I mean, that was 4 years after the country elected Donald Trump president. And of course, this was going on during another election campaign, and it was going on during the pandemic. So everybody was
Okay.
engaged
Right.
on
Right.
so many different levels, uh, and everybody was in so much of a mood for everything has to change. We cannot go backwards now. This has to go forward. And what happened with George Floyd was the catalyst to that. And the athletes, they said, across the board, we're going to do something about this. So again, the NBA was in its bubble at the time, and the NBA players were in the playoffs. The WNBA also in their bubble, and they're in the middle of their regular season. And for the most part, simultaneously, they decided we're going to speak up, and we're going to, and if we have to stop play and walk off the court in front of everybody, we will go ahead and do that. But the fact that the Bucks decided to do that, and the Bucks did it during the playoffs, and also obviously the fact that it was the Bucks because that was also the week that Jacob Blake was shot and paralyzed up in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Right.
And so that was like an insult on top of an insult, and it was a signal that these people really are not going to stop based on all the protest, regardless of all the protests that were going on over George Floyd. It was the breaking point for the Bucks players, and they said, "This is our opportunity," and that's when they said they were going to do it. And the leagues and the teams, just across the board, they were in a much different place than they were 4 years earlier. It was all push back. Don't let these players take over. Don't let the inmates run the asylum.
Right.
Don't
Right.
let them, don't let, we're not taking our boots off their necks. They're going to remember their place. They're going to remember who's in charge, who's the boss, who they're playing for, who pays their salaries. That was 4 years earlier. Now, with the whole world clearly on this pushing against the establishment and pushing against the status quo and pushing in favor of radical, drastic change, all these teams knew that they were on the wrong side if they tried to resist all of this. And that's when they decided, okay, maybe we should just put a pause on the playoffs. Maybe we better put a pause on these games. Maybe we shouldn't continue this round of the it was before the U.S. Open, but it was like tennis tournament up in New York. But it's like, put a pause on this tournament. Let's put a pause on NFL training camps because NFL teams started walking out.
Right. Right.
Let's put a pause on the baseball season because teams were saying, and again, this how tiny the percentage of black players in baseball are now. They were vocal enough, and their teammates were behind them enough. Again, drastic change from 4 years earlier. They said, "No, we will not play. We're gonna support what's going on here. We're gonna support what's happening what the Bucks are doing, what the NBA is doing, and the WNBA, and we're gonna join up with all this. I mean, a golf tournament they shut that down for a couple days. Literally, sports just came to a halt for basically an entire weekend.
Right.
And the Bucks had been the one basically to be the catalyst for that.
Right.
And they were also the ones who also, again, the NBA and the WNBA, everyone's who also decided that when we come back from all of this, we're going to make an even bigger statement. We're going to start taking a knee before every game. We're going to paint Black Lives Matter on the court. We're going to put posters of Breonna Taylor up in the arena where the bubble was taking place. We're going to put our statements on the backs of our uniforms. Everything began to tilt in that favor. And it all became because they said, "Here's the momentum of these George Floyd protests. We're gonna do something with that. We have more visibility than we've ever had, at any other point of our lives or our careers. Let's do something about it." And that's what they did.
Wow, great. And I can't wait to talk about where we are today with that. But kind of now going backwards to as you were doing research, on the different kind of activist movements or different activists, was there one that really surprised you as far as either what they went through or just some of the things that they had to do to get their point across?
Yeah, I think the one that I knew the least about and was the most shocked when I sort of started doing the digging around and everything was a track and field athlete from the 50s and early 60s named Rose Robinson. Um, and I'd heard bits and pieces about her as I was working on the Tommy Smith, the book on Tommy Smith, and as sort of the protests began with Colin Kaepernick, when the conversation of, hey, has anybody ever used the national anthem as a platform before? As it turned out, she did,
Mm,
again at a time when it was rare. It was even before Tommy Smith and John Carlos. This was in, I think, 1959 and 1960. This was the Pan American Games in 1959. She was, I believe, a long jumper. Um, and so she was aiming for the 1960 Olympics in Rome, which, as it turns out, that was the one where Wilma Rudolph and all the Tennessee State athletes, jumped onto the stage. It was when then Cassius Clay became a worldwide sensation. There was a lot of basic evolution that was taking place at the time. And at the time, she was on track to be at the forefront of that, but she was also going to be on the forefront on a different level because she refused to stand when the national anthem was played during the Pan Am Games the year before. And again, from that moment on, she really became an outcast in terms of what the U.S. Olympic Committee and the U.S. government was doing, because that's what she was. She was again making a statement against American policy in a bunch of different places, including very obviously for her race relations. And she's kind of been disappeared from sports history, from track and field history, from Olympic history, because she never got a chance to perform in the Olympics, where she probably would have blown up along with all the other young Black women athletes that became stars there. And she really kind of basically got buried because of her stance, because she was outspoken, and because she had used the anthem as a platform for her protest against what society was doing to us.
mm-hmm. Wow, and that was just fascinating to me to see that was happening, because I did go back and kind of look, well, why do we stand for the anthem? Is there ever been reason why there's been protests? And there actually has been Supreme Court cases over protesting the flag. They were political in nature, or I should say spiritual in nature. And there was the famous West Virginia case. So um is it because, well, before I get to that, do most people know why they're standing for the national anthem, or they just because it's common?
That's what it is. It's routine. It's common. It's what they've seen all their lives. It's everything that they know. There's a pretty good chance. And I would really love to see polls about this. And one thing I remember really vividly, and I will say this, and you probably experienced this as well as an author. You write a book, or really anything, any long written piece that you've done a lot of research on. You look back, go like, I wish I'd thought about it. I wish I'd remembered that. I wish I'd added that. I'd
Right.
really bet that threw that in there. Yeah, that would have been a great thing to research. It's like, you know, what do people only understand the national anthem through the lens of sports? Because that's their only interaction with it when it gets right down to it. I mean,
Right, because
you
even
know,
in school we say, "I pledge allegiance."
right. The
We don't
Pledge of
sing the
Allegiance
national
is
anthem.
what you say at school, and you don't really hear it. Even when you see a lot of ceremonies, you see the inauguration every 4 years. You see things like, there's going to be the Memorial Day commemorations. It's going to be 4th of July. The national anthem really doesn't get played all that often, but it is played on a constant, regular basis. Now, not only at games, but at every sporting event. They played the national anthem at the NFL draft last month. I mean, it's not even it's not even a competition. It gets played all the time in relation to sports, as people believe that it's integral to sports. What all it really is, it goes back to World War One. It was played like during the World Series because the troops were coming home, and they felt that they had to sort of create a patriotic fervor about having conquered the world, and so they associated with baseball, and baseball had that huge visibility. So that's how it became a habit, and then habit turns into tradition. And you realize that outside of things like the Olympics and things like that, national anthems are not part of sporting events anywhere else in the world except here. you know
Mm,
you see them at
wow,
the
right.
Olympics, you see them at, say, the World Cup and things like that. But in terms of every game, every league, every sport, I mean, literally, if you go to a little league baseball game, they're playing the national anthem before that. I mean, that's what I grew up on.
Mm,
I played CYO baseball, and they played the little recording of the national anthem
right,
before
right,
we took the field. Pee wee football, cheerleading competitions, track and field meets. There's a little loudspeaker. They're playing the national anthem, and you're like, and that's the association is with sports, and that's how people took it when Tommy Smith and John Carlos protested. That's how they took it when uh, Colin Kaepernick and then the other players after that began taking a knee and raising a fist. They felt that it was they've intertwined sports and patriotism in America, so indelibly. And now this is obviously, sort of a strategy and a tactic by
right.
most leagues,
But
especially
most,
by the
yeah,
NFL.
but most people just they reference the military
The military, yeah.
and
I mean,
protection of the country. The flag represents that. Um,
well, that wasn't always. I mean, even that wasn't a part thing. There was not the Marine Color Guard. There were not there was not the Air Force flyovers. There was, they played the national anthem, but then they added the military aspect of it to the point where there's an there's an instant and unbreakable association between the national anthem and the military, when technically the national anthem is supposed to represent everybody, not just the military.
right,
It's not just
right,
a salute to the military, it's a salute to all of the country, not just the people defending, but the people who are being defended, by his
right,
country. And of course,
right.
the national anthem is like it's based on a battle in the War of 1812. I
Yeah.
mean, living in Maryland, they take it personally. There was
Mm,
and this was sort of mentioned in the book as well. A lot of fans in Baltimore did not want Colin Kaepernick to come to the Ravens, even though they were totally they had horrible rash of injuries. One training camp, not that long after Kaepernick was let go, um, and there was a groundswell to get him on the team, and there are people who didn't want him there on the grounds of you cannot have a man who protested the national anthem that was born here in Baltimore, at Fort McHenry, with Francis Scott Key seeing the battle from his front porch or whatever,
right,
and have a guy here who insults the anthem and insults the flag and insults the troops, and so that was that groundswell that was going on, which was part of the whole thing, which
right.
I touched on
Oof,
in the
I
book,
guess
which
strong enough. Wow,
yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah.
So yeah, well, let's move to the chapter with the non-sports activists, and primarily not gonna focus on OJ just because. We're gonna really Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan. These were definitely two of the biggest athletes in their day, and so they are known for not being activists, and kind of outspoken. Where it really kind of, well, I guess I don't know if it really put a ding on their careers, but there was clearly a side eye, I guess, for lack of a better word. So, but they also were in a time where they didn't have social media, where they could immediately react to something that they witnessed. So, really, my one of the things I thought about when reading about them, that they probably had PR people handling um, their message and what got out, because they probably were two of the probably most focused athletes out there, and it's obvious in their play. So was it the fact that their PR people um, kind of influenced the messages that went out between them? And if that's the case, why do they get dinged for it?
It's an excellent question. Um, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't really think about when they think about both of those guys in that context. Um, I think what stuck with people, at that time when they were as big as could be, not just in the sports world, but far, far, far beyond that. They were recognizable names and had incredible followings everywhere. If you knew nothing about basketball, knew nothing about golf, you knew who Michael Jordan and you knew who Tiger Woods were, and you would stop what you were doing to see to see
Right.
what was going on with them. And the commercials were just, they were ubiquitous. You couldn't look for 2 seconds if you never saw a basketball game or a golf tournament, you were still going to see Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods all the time, and that was absolutely a part of, I think, the decisions that they made, because you know it's really kind of funny because in a way they were so groundbreaking in those aspects because there had never been black athletes who were at that level of worldwide endorsement, marketability, uh, recognition, and ability to sell products, to get people to follow them and to buy and to consume based on their word and their image alone. I mean, that was such an enormous obstacle for people to scale. And you think of all the legends that preceded them, the Dr. J's and the Willie
Hmm.
Mazes and Hank
Right.
Aaron's, and just it's funny you mentioned Jim Brown, Walter Payton, just all those athletes, track and field athletes. It's crazy. It was the dichotomy between what they were doing successfully on the field and the way they were cashing in on it off the field, the way white athletes were from the beginning of time, going all back to like Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey and all that. Tiger and Michael broke through all of that. And so they were revolutionary in that aspect. The flip side of that is they could not jeopardize that by taking the kind of stand that would drive all those people off. I think that they were certainly getting uh, advice, counsel from the people that were counting on for marketing, their public relations people, all their representatives. The people who in the agent business, the people who represented those two guys, those guys, they're like legendary people. If there was like an agent hall of fame, then Michael Jordan's agent and Tiger Woods' agent would probably be there. And within their business and within their sports, they're huge names. Anybody who'd ask about that, you recognize them, and they were all on board of this. I mean, they knew what what was ahead for both of them that they could step on. I mean, there's a whole movie about that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Air.
Yeah.
that's really what that's about.
I just started watching it, so I can't wait to finish
Yeah,
it.
I'd like it. That is on my schedule for very soon because I want. Yeah, and the thing is, we've seen all those people before. We see like the Sonny Vaccaros and the David Fox and those people. And there's probably going to be a movie about Tiger, and what he has done for Nike as well. I mean, just the Nike itself, owes so much to both of them, but it's also vice versa with them because they have taken those two guys all the way to the new heights. But you can't get that far with that, if you risk all of that and say try to sell shoes or Gatorade or Coke or clubs or whatever while talking about revolution and stopping the police and don't let them get away with this and that and civil rights and equality. you know they know what the audience is. That as much as we wish that black people could generate that kind of wealth for each other, numbers wise, we not in a position to do that. We can't sustain
Yeah.
that.
So I mean, I guess, and so, but and we'll just use LeBron because I would have to say
Okay.
he's probably the only one.
Right.
Steph Curry may be a little bit rung below him, but he's able to use the platform and is also on that kind of that level. Why is it different for LeBron versus Michael? Is it because, yeah, I'll let you answer it.
Well, I don't track you because I think you're right. I think it's sort of the evolution of time. I think that a lot of people saw, you know, what Michael and Tiger, what choices they made, um, to say no to, putting themselves out there like that when they had the greatest platform than any other black athlete has ever had. Even bigger, far, far bigger than anything that even Ali or Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Jim Brown and Bill Russell and those sort of guys had. They had scaled the mountaintop. Everybody saw them as, hey, this is your opportunity to really change things. If you say that we got to stop X, Y, and Z, they're going to listen to you like they have never listened to anybody else. And the fact that they said no, in a lot of minds, it's tainted their legacies. You know, they look at you can't deny what Michael or Tiger has done or accomplished, or the position they hold. But that's always going to be held against them by certain people. Somebody is always going to be there to point that out and say, you chose the just immeasurable wealth and fame and influence, and you said, well, I'm going to take this influence, but I'm only going to take it to enrich myself. I think
Right.
that once several generations grow up on that, like LeBron's generation and Steph Curry's generation, the generation that later on did begin to speak out. They wore the "I Can't Breathe" T-shirts. They did the "Hands Up, Don't Shoot" protests. They participated fully in everything that was going on around George Floyd. They spoke back against Donald Trump. They spoke back against the people who supported those people,
Right.
because they said, yes, I have the fame, yes, I have the thing, but I do have this position. What's the worst that can happen if I use the platform that I do? We've
And I
seen this.
just I wonder about that because Michael, people are still buying Michael Jordan shoes. His
Yeah.
documentary was still off the charts.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I don't even know if Tiger will lose any of that, only because of there hasn't been anyone that come behind him that is of color as of now. And I think there's been other things that have affected him, just the car crash and all of that. But I mean, I think they're still endured, and maybe it's in the sports community. Maybe they get dinged, but it is fascinating to really consider. But then so let's kind of take it to a league, perspective, because you really talked about you interwove with the WNBA and how, I guess, connected they were as a league when they spoke out about injustices that were going on. So would you say would you say they were more galvanized in the things that were going on at that time? And then if that is the case, would you consider them? How would you rank the leagues as far as is the most, I guess, for lack of the most woke?
So we got to reclaim that word. I'm glad you
Yeah,
said
yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah, honestly, it's fascinating because I think the WNBA is really they're in first place by a pretty huge margin. I think that their activities during a lot of these protests, and that goes back to the year that Colin Kaepernick got started, and really, it has continued, you know, regularly ever since then. You know, they have always been outspoken. Um, and they've always been galvanized. And they've always, you know, been comfortable and secure enough to have it reach across racial lines. Entire teams uh, would stand behind, the black players who encouraged some of these protests that have gone on over the years. And they have always stuck together. They have not been holdouts in this place and that place. They haven't had teammates butting heads against each other, things like that. Uh, you know, they were always united, no matter what the cause was, and they were often united against their bosses, against the teams, against the league itself, which often had to be sort of dragged into the into the fight along with them. So you always have to make a very important distinction between WNBA players and the league itself, because the players were always at the forefront and they always took the controls and took the lead and made sure everybody sort of followed them. And honestly, I could probably devote, or anybody else could devote a whole book about why that dynamic is working with them. I don't know if it's because, women have had so much more of an uphill fight on the bigger stage of sports,
Right.
why they've had to hold it together much more, because they had so much more to lose, because they had so little to begin with. I think you see the same in a lot of women's professional sports, certainly tennis. You see that sort of dynamic as well. But the WNBA has really never flinched in the spotlight of these sort of fights. The NBA, I think, obviously, a lot of it obviously is the racial dynamic that's there. But again, it's also a function of its biggest names. And if the biggest names are on board, then you're going to get a lot more people following it. And again, that sort of goes back to the lesson of Michael Jordan. You sort of ask yourself, what if Michael Jordan had been that sort of spokesperson, that person in the forefront, the way LeBron has been, the way that Steph Curry has been, the way Kobe was for a while before we lost him. How different might things have been? Because we're seeing it so much with LeBron and with Steph and with those guys. We go being the ones out front and the ones saying, "Hey, if he can do it, then I can go ahead and do it well." Because he's the guy we watch. He's the guy we take our cues from. And in some cases, certainly at this stage of those guys' career, these are the guys that I grew up idolizing, and now I feel more comfortable speaking out and being this vocal because I see what they've done. And I've seen that it's not only effective, but they also, are able to maintain, the position that they're in.
Okay. And with social media, do you find that the athletes are more outspoken now than they were back then? Or is it just
That
because it's
that
easier? Yeah.
that's always been a really fascinating question, because I mean the apparatus is in place for them to use it and to be seen and heard in ways that previous generations never have, and have used that in a lot of really interesting, creative ways. And being outspoken has been one of them. I mean, other times, in the past, obviously, we can only rely on what we in the media could do. Were we going to have a conversation with Michael Jordan or any of the other past superstar athletes about these issues? That it was rare in the past. I mean, basically, what was being planned for 1968 at the Olympics was being kept really, really under the radar until a bunch of international reporters started talking to Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and they said kind of like, "Hey, I'm glad you asked that." And then boom, they told everything that was
Right.
going on, and all of a sudden, all the media here, and so that probably held off a lot of that. When these guys have their own voices now, they can use them. Now, obviously, the media landscape is bigger, so there are even more mics and cameras trained on the LeBrons and people like that now.
Right.
But they also make sure that they're heard on their own platforms. I mean, obviously, that's where Colin Kaepernick kind of started what he was doing and sort of got on people's radar. So it wasn't a total shock when he started kneeling. People remembered, oh, whoa, he really came out hard on Twitter and on IG about those killings. LeBron and Steph, they go right on their platforms. Literally my favorite tweet of all time. I've saved it. I'll save the
Oh yeah.
screenshot of it, and so hopefully it'll last even if Twitter doesn't. Was when he called Donald Trump "you bum."
Yeah. Yeah.
I scroll back to that every once in a while and just laugh my head off, and like how I can't imagine that happening in the past, like Tommy Smith saying that to like Nixon. I mean, it's hard to it's hard to imagine or
Right.
hard to envision. I mean, maybe he would have if he'd had a platform like that, but this is what LeBron had available to him, and he did it. And you start to see, and that, like probably the best example is, again, it's something I sort of pointed out in the book. The football players during 2020, during the George Floyd stuff, when they said, Roger Goodell, you have to admit that you were wrong in how you treated Colin Kaepernick and how you treated us players when we protested. You need to apologize, and you need to state clearly on the record in front of everybody that Black Lives Matter. They didn't go to the networks. They didn't get their own show or anything like that. They
Right.
went on Twitter and everything like that. They recorded it piece by piece, put it together, put it out there for everybody to see, including everybody in the NFL office. But the whole world saw that.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's something that you can't envision that happening 20 years ago, 30 years
Right.
ago, or something
Because
like
even if
that.
they did, it would have got watered down in some
Exactly.
fashion.
Yeah.
Right.
You
Right.
need to go through a filter and the unfiltered nature. But and that's the potential of it. Now, how much will that go on? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another question. That is
Yeah.
another question, because we're seeing how fast the changes are taking place.
Right.
I mean, it seems like, hey, Colin Kaepernick was 7 years ago. Feels like a long time, but it was really like almost a blip, because you saw how much it changed in 4 years,
Right.
and now it's been 3 years since then. So there may be
Yeah.
even more on the horizon that we just haven't envisioned yet.
And so now with the the pandemic is somewhat over. I mean, I guess, everyone feels it's over.
I hope it is.
Um and Black Lives Matter, it's still there, but of course it's kind of died down. Um but there are black people still getting killed by police and in subways and thing of that nature. So, but you don't see the protests so much now anymore. Is it that the activism kind of at a slow boil, or things being done behind the scenes, or is it going to take another overt act for that to happen again?
Yeah, the really the thing about these waves of activism, as they've sort of evolved over the years, is that you really don't see them coming. You don't know which one is going to be the flashpoint. You don't know what's going to light the fuse. I don't think any of us know. I mean, it's been really unfortunate how many times we've seen a video of a police execution of somebody black over the years. Something about the George Floyd one ended up being the one that blew everything up. Something about Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, lit Colin Kaepernick's fuse, 4 years
Mm,
before that. You know, it's hard to say which ones will be the ones to light things up, but when it does, the other unpredictable thing is what will be done about it, because we didn't see we didn't see it being Colin Kaepernick doing something, and we didn't see kneeling become what it became
mhm.
when it did, and we certainly didn't anticipate, you know, after George Floyd, the mass protests, and we didn't see teams boycotting playoff games, or just walking off the court, or the field, or wherever, that year. I sort of get the idea that there may be a gesture that somebody makes that will change it. There may be a phrase that galvanizes everybody. But if I had to say what's the most likely thing that would happen if something does happen, I think it would be some sort of walkout again. I think
Mm,
people are going to remember what happened, 3 years ago, um, and they're going to do things like They're going to do things like walking out. They're going to maybe walk out of a game, walk out of an event, walk out of a match. It might be, you know, it might be during the World Series. It might be during the NBA Finals. It might be, there's Olympics
right.
are coming up next year.
Mhm. Right
Maybe
before the
maybe
game.
something like that. Right
Right
before.
before the game. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they
Yeah.
might make a declaration saying, well, game is 2 days away. and we're telling you right now, we're not going to play, or
mm.
national championship game or March
Right,
Madness or something like
right,
that.
right.
All the NCAA tournament,
Oh yeah,
college,
man.
the college athletes are going to be really interesting to watch
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the next several
Oh,
years on
the
a lot
world
of
would stop at March Madness.
that's
I
the
might
thing.
even
Yeah.
get upset and go. You know?
I mean,
But
as
yeah,
Adri said, it's really going to catch people's
yeah,
attention at the
absolutely.
most critical time.
Gotcha.
And I think that would, I think that would be the one. And I think we're going to
Okay.
end up being shocked. It's like, wow, him or her? Really?
Yeah.
That's the one? Because
Yeah. Okay.
that's what's been the case, throughout history. That's kind of
Right.
how it's
Right.
evolved.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna do something a little fun. I mean, this has been a serious, heavy topic, so had to add a little fun to it. So I know you've heard about the Mount Rushmore of basketball, Mount Rushmore of this. So I figured, hey, why don't we do the Mount Rushmore of athlete activists? So who would and it's four heads, right? I just want to,
It's for,
my
yeah.
history. Yes, okay. Gotcha. Who would be on the Mount Rushmore of athlete activists? And so I guess and you can either name them and then we'll set the criteria, or set the criteria first and then name them. I'll let you choose.
um, hmm. I will ask this because I think about this a lot. Believe it or not, it's while it does sort of cross my mind. You know, the temptation is to uh, say Tommy Smith and Carlos as one entity, as one unit. Am I
Okay.
allowed to do that, or do they have to be separate people?
We'll put I mean, because it was so iconic, and
Yeah,
I think it was 1967 they did, or 60.
1968. Yeah,
So I was
that's
like,
what I was
not even one yet, but I
right.
do remember the photo. I mean, it was
Right.
any barbershop alive had that photo
Yes.
in it,
Exactly.
and so
You knew it
yeah,
before you knew it.
yeah,
That's how it
we'll
was as
count
well.
them. We'll count them as one. We'll just
Okay.
make it a halvesies. So there you go.
Cool. Cool. Have one after the other. Yeah. Okay. Well, then I will do this. I will say that, and then we could bounce around the ideas. You can give sort of my criteria, and you can talk about what yours would be if
Okay.
that's cool for you.
Yeah, sounds
Um,
good.
okay, my Mount Rushmore would be Muhammad Ali,
Okay.
uh, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, Colin Kaepernick, and Kurt Flood.
Oh, that's right. You're a baseball guy. Yes, I'm a baseball guy too. I played, so yeah, and I
Okay,
wouldn't.
okay,
And I would,
and I will
but you
say
didn't.
this,
But you didn't. So you did. But you didn't really throw Kurt Flood in the book, though.
I know, yeah, and honestly, and I wish that I mean, and I've had the great fortune to get to know some of his children because they're doing so much to keep him alive. That was one of the really challenging things about the book. I mean, it wasn't like an afterthought. Totally, sometimes it was going on as I was sort of pulling it all together. It's like I could make this thing like 5,000 pages. I could make it 10 volumes and things like that. But how do I make it all into one book? And the people that, in hindsight, I wish that I had included would be Kurt Flood and Arthur Ashe. I would have
Okay.
I would have added and given uh, a lot more space to. Um, but a book is a book. So, but
Okay.
Kurt Flood is always going to be on that list for me.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
the longer, the more that I've had a chance to read about him and learn about him, and again talk to his family and his former teammates and people who came up behind him. That's why I've always put him on there. But those would be that would be my Mount Rushmore.
Okay. Um, those are all heavy hitters. Definitely. I would put. I definitely. You have to put Muhammad Ali on the list. And John Carlo and Tommy Smith. Those would be on there. But I would probably switch up the other ones. Two, and I got two more. I would probably put um Colin. I would have to put Colin. So that's almost three. But I would put Megan Rapinoe on there.
That's a
And
good one.
and the reason why I would put her is because she spoke out about a lot of different things. It was women's rights, it was LGBTQ community, and also racial. So she could have really been um thrown to the wolves. And I know just women's athletes in general already get the short end of the stick. But the fact that and it wasn't that just that, she was also galvanizing the league, that the league had to speak out. So she took on that stance too, that I'm going to be the spokesperson, but ladies, you guys have to come along with me. And I think that took a lot of courage to do so, whereby, I mean, with LeBron being just for example, LeBron kind of had his own platform. He's just the king, so he had his platform to use it as best he had. If you want to follow me, fine, but you don't have to do it. But I think Megan, like, okay, this is what we needed to take a stance as a league and as women in sports, and got other WNBA to follow as well. So I do think she would go on there. So
That's an outstanding addition, and full confession on that as well. Honestly, if I could, and I made sure I got her into the book very heavily.
yeah,
Which was really, really important. Especially, again, she was specifically and individually, along with all the teammates, were really specifically targeted by Trump during a lot of all that what was going on at the time, while she was representing the United States on the world stage with
right.
maybe the most successful team that wore the USA's colors in any sport, anywhere, at any time, ever. Even more than the men's basketball team, the women's basketball teams.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. women's soccer team is just light years ahead of everybody. They have just run the world soccer game for so long, and she has been at the center of that forever. But what
and that was prior also. I don't know if it was in the same time period. You could probably correct me. Where they were, the league or the professional league or the IOC was really challenging, especially how much they get compensated and all of those different. They were, light years ahead of men's soccer, but yet from a financial standpoint, they were not receiving what they deserved. So
yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because again, when you get a chance to do a book like this and you think, again, I could do 10 volumes of this.
Yeah.
If I were to do the next volume, it would be strictly about the women athletes. It was really kind of a joy to give the WNBA players a spotlight in this book. But I would, the U.S. women's soccer program would get a huge one, with her at the forefront of that. What has gone on over the decades in women's tennis, starting with Billie Jean King, going all the way through what Venus and Serena have done, not just on the court and not just for Black people and for all the people who have been shut out historically from the sport, but what they've done in equalizing, the women's prize money.
Yeah, there you go. You got a new
kicking down those.
You got a new book to work on.
So I believe I have a new book. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So two more questions, and then I'll let you go. But this has been great. I'm interviewing David Steele. Author of It Was Always a Choice: Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism. So let's kind of fast forward, I guess, 30 years from now. How do you think Colin Kaepernick will be remembered?
I honestly believe, and people sort of scoff at this when it gets sort of talked about, and even when he was at the sort of peak of his visibility, when so much was going on surrounding him. I really think that in enough time, he's going to be looked at like Ali, and he's going to be looked at like Tommy Smith and John Carlos and a lot of the other athletes that we've seen. Even though they won't, he will not have had a fistful of championships and rings and medals and things like that. I mean, the movement that he started, the fact that we can just we say the phrase "take a knee." I mean, he's the one who he's at the heart of that. He's the soul of that. He was the man generating that when all the George Floyd protests were taking place. 4 years after he had done it originally, and long after he had been out of the NFL, never to return. That was the dominant choice of direct action. People go out into the street and protest, and they would take a knee someplace, wherever it was they were. I mean, there were cops taking a knee, realizing that,
Right.
they, and there was no further, there was no more resistance they could put up against what was going on. That's always going to be, associated with him. That's going to be an indelible thing, and people are going to associate the movement of, the late 2010s and 2020s. They're going to affiliate that with him, and they're going to, and you really will not be able to talk about the history of the NFL without talking about him, because this is a very significant moment, in NFL history, what has gone on since he started that, because it just sort of, unleashed just hornet's nest of people saying that they've had enough, really literally up to the point where the
Mm.
coaches said, we're going to sue, to stop the discrimination in hiring, where the barrier for black quarterbacks, maybe for good, has finally come down.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
A lot, and just everything the league is gonna have to fight with in terms of, whether players could speak out or speak up, that's gonna go on, and he's always gonna be associated with that. Um, See, one of the things I mentioned in the book is that, eventually Tommy Smith and John Carlos had statues built of them. And that was unfathomable at the time that they did that, because it was believed that they were just going to be outcasts from sports. And there was no way any established institution would ever honor them with something like that. They were always going to be considered, you know, uh, permanent outsiders, and permanent rejects from, decent and polite sports society. Ali eventually, earned a lot of those honors as well. He's this revered revolutionary by the time he died, and now Tommy Smith and John Carlos have statues. They're literally in the Smithsonian now, and I believe that we're going to see that with Colin Kaepernick in 30 years, maybe 40 years. But eventually that's where he would have been elevated. And I'll just say this much about that. I remember I'd sort of thrown that out there when he first started protesting. People started comparing him to Ali and those guys, and people literally laughed and said, "Don't ever disgrace the name of Muhammad Ali by comparing this fraud, this disrespectful, troop hating,
Wow.
lazy bum
Wow.
to him." And now you look at where he is now, and you know,
Right.
I think that's how it's going to be. I think that's how it's going to go down in history.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, this is a question it's a surprise.
Oh,
But what I always do is, because we as black men are we do a lot. I mean, women do a lot too, but we're out there trying to do the best we can within the struggle, but we don't always take the time to think about ourselves and what's going on in the world for us individually. So I always like to end the show with just how are you doing, as a black man in America?
whew, that is different. Yeah, you know, I think that what I think about a lot is that, when I was much younger, and started realizing what I wanted to do with my life, and what I wanted to do for a living, and whether or not I would be able to sort of follow my dreams and indulge in what I wanted to do. I always wanted to write. I mean, I loved reading, I loved writing, and I was always hoping that I was going to get a chance to write about really these kind of things. I mean, even things like growing up. Hey, I'd love to talk about how, love watching Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and all these great players and teams and things like that. But I also want to write about how there are no black managers, how there are no black head coaches, why there ain't no blacks on, TV, you know, uh, doing these commercials, how come there are no black sportscasters, things like that. I hope I get a chance to do that. And I got a chance to do that. But as I was, coming along in the business, I was always like, by the time I get to this point in my life, 30 years later or whatever, and I'm sort of an older head, and I've gotten a chance to accomplish things, and others have come behind me and things like that, everything's going to be different. We're going to have equality. We're going to have justice. We're going to have freedom. We're going to be fully integrated into society. We're going to be exactly where we deserve to be. We're going to be comfortable having black presidents and black astronauts and black owners and black quarterbacks and just all these great accomplishments, and we can live wherever we want to, and we can just throw away all the things that we had to go through, because I could see this happening. We're going to be the generation that's going to do all of that. And then we look at what's going on today, and you know we're fighting like our predecessors did. We're fighting like our fathers and uncles and grandparents and great grandparents, things like that, because they're doing everything they can to hold on to what they had, to push us down, to break us, to end us, to erase us, to just stop us forever, because they realize that if they ever give us a little tiny sliver of an opening, that there will be no stopping us. So they pulled out every trick in the book to try to stop us. And I think that is sort of the dominant thing that I think about all the time. It's like, it is still a fight. It is still a constant fight. And so all I want to do is try to stay strong, stay peaceful, keep a level head, keep my mind at peace, my mind at ease, so that I always have enough reserves to continue to fight. Because you realize after a certain time, after you see who gets elected and who gets power, and whether you're still considered a threat, and whether you can step out the door or ride the subway, or go back to your house with a can of iced tea and Skittles, and know that your life can end right then and there just because somebody doesn't like the looks of you. It's going to be a burden we're going to fight forever, and that the next generations are going to have to win that battle. But I want to be one of the ones who can make that easier. So I want to stay strong. I want to believe that one of these generations soon is going to be the one that breaks through and is going to make us win on every level, get to where we belong and where we deserve to be. Which I'm not sure if that was an answer, but
Yeah, no, I mean that was fantastic, and I do think that your book is a springboard to that, because it helps, and especially for the young people that don't they don't know a lot of these stories. Why it's great to fight and know about these things. It probably should be a book that they should talk about in college, at the college level. So, those of you watching the show, pick up this book. It was always a choice. Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism. The author, David Steele. You won't be disappointed. It was a fantastic book.
thank you very much, man. Again, I really appreciate you reading it, talking about it, and talking about everything that it means. And
Well,
I
thank
appreciate
you.
everything you do. I really do.
All right, thank you. For all of you, this is the Black Men Speak podcast. My name is Keith Dent. Check us out, and Dave, when we find some hot legal sports stuff, we'll definitely have you back on.
I'll be here. I'm ready for it.
All right, bye bye.